Well, Big D back and better than ever. Talking hurricanes today on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in Tyler, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See all my videos. Also check out the Big D podcast. Happy Veterans Day. So joining us, a guy who loves chasing hurricanes just as much as I do. Tyler Spalding. So Tyler, welcome and. I'm glad neither one of us is chasing a hurricane right now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for having me. Um, yeah, all things considered, it was a relatively quiet season this year. Now, obviously, for the folks that did get impacted, it wasn't quiet for them. And that's why the saying goes, it only takes one. So thankfully here in the US, we were lucky. But of course, some of our friends down in the Caribbean, they weren't as fortunate as us. But yeah, and now that we're in November, it's starting to get cold, and we can pretty much probably go ahead and close the book on this season.
Yeah, thoughts and prayers are with everyone affected by Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, and elsewhere. Because watching Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica, it was one of those storms where I don't care if you're a meter, I don't care how many storms you see. That's awful seeing a storm that strong hit anyway.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, a nation like Jamaica, um, full of resilient people, and I know that they're going to bounce back. Um, and that's one of the things about big disasters like this is it tends to bring out the good in people. And there are some instances of people that want to be bad and do the wrong thing and take advantage of people in a dire situation. But me personally, being a resident of Panama City, I went through Hurricane Michael in 2018, and that was a direct impact from a Category 5. And there was way more good from the people in the community than there was bad. And I think that was probably the last time we as a community were close knit. Um, so yeah, like you said, thoughts and prayers to the people of Jamaica, Haiti, and the islands affected, Cuba, and everywhere that got impacted this year. And I know they're going to bounce back stronger than ever.
Do you give did you give any thought of potentially chasing Melissa in Jamaica? Were you like, I'm sitting this one on the sideline?
I I would have loved to. I tell you what, I actually don't have a passport. So
That-
I don't leave the country. I don't ever leave the country. But it is something on my to-do list. It is something that I want to start doing as time progresses. I want to start chasing more hurricanes in Mexico, Jamaica. I want to try to get out to the Western Pacific to try to chase typhoons out there. So I wanted to go chase Melissa, don't get me wrong, and I would have been there if I had a passport.
yeah. Need one of those passports to chase storms. Or I think there was a storm in Bermuda this year, but it wasn't any like Melissa. So
Yeah.
what was your earliest memory with hurricanes?
My earliest true memory would have to be Hurricane Ivan in 2004. Um, so, Hurricane Ivan, for those that don't know, that hurricane spawned a record number, and I don't think it's been broken, but it's a record number of tornadoes. Milton may have been close last year, but essentially, Ivan was just spitting off tornadoes left and right. And we were about 100 miles away from the center. So we weren't getting a direct impact, but we were still well within the rain shield and we were still well within, those tornadic bands in around the circulation. And so just constantly for the entire duration, just tornado warning after tornado warning going off. I remember watching live coverage with my grandfather of the local news station, and the TV meteorologist back then, Jason Kelly. Remember him being on the television, actually showing a tornado live crossing the tower cam as it was happening. So that was my first true memory of hurricanes. But of course, being born in '95, I was born in June, and then we had Opal 3 months later. So Opal came through when I was 3 months old.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, that 2004 season was crazy. Charlie hit in Punta Gorda. Francis and Jean hit the East Coast, and then of course Ivan hit the Alabama Florida border. Whether you're in Gulf Shores or Pensacola, both cities were heavily impacted.
Yep, exactly. And I remember Francis. Francis was relatively weak when it made it to our area, but I know it impacted definitely the East Coast and did damage to our friends over there. But I remember because I was what 4 year or not 4 years old, sorry, 9 years old in 2004, and so I was riding my bike around the neighborhood as Francis was making its approach through the peninsula, and it was probably one of the most brilliant sunsets I've ever seen in my life, with the upper level clouds from the hurricane, impacting the way the light was coming through. And I just remember riding my bike. It was kind of breezy, and it was a real pretty sunset. So Francis was one of those ones that, even though it didn't do any damage to us in the Panhandle, it's something that I'll remember because of that memory.
Yeah, also I remember Hurricane Francis hit during Labor Day weekend, and it was the slowest pain you know what we've ever seen. I mean, I could have walked faster.
Right. Yeah, right. No, exactly. Exactly. And then I don't remember how long after Francis did Janine hit. Was it just a couple of weeks or
Yeah, basically maybe a month later.
yeah, right, yeah, like you said, a month later, knocking on the door of the same places. So I break it down um, as 2004 was year of the Atlantic, and then 2005 was year of the Gulf. You know.
Yeah, and then of course 2005, Dennis hit Pensacola, and we all know what happened with Katrina. Rita hitting Louisiana Texas border, and when we're basically hitting here again. Again, curse you, storms hitting Florida.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, Dennis was the first storm that I remember that we actually lost power from.
Oops.
So Dennis was closer to Panama City than Ivan was, and it was relatively the same strength. Both storms were weakening on approach, but Dennis actually caused us to lose power a little bit in Panama City. And I remember the power going out on that one. And my mom used to drive us to the beach, and we would go out towards the pier and look at all the waves coming in. And so we did that, got back home, and then about an hour later the power went out. For about a day. But yeah, so Dennis was crazy, and that's kind of one that gets forgotten about around here because it was sandwiched in between, you know, Ivan and Katrina off to the west.
Yeah, and Dennis hit in July, which was weird. I'm like, storms don't usually hit in July, but then I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah,
Everything was in ample supply. Like you get a tornado outbreak, there's instability here, there's wind shear, everything was in ample supplies that year.
yeah, for the whole year basically. I think that was the first time we branched out into the Greek alphabet. I could be wrong on that, but I
You
know
are
we
you are correct. You
yeah.
are
So that was interesting, and then of course nobody ever thought that 2005 would be topped, and then sure enough, here comes 2020, and that whole year for everything was insane, and then of course the hurricane season on top of that was pretty crazy, and so now they don't do Greek storms anymore. Now they do an alternative name list. So
almost like winter storms, but Of course, Laura hit Louisiana. I'm trying to think. Storms in Alabama. I think that's a season I don't want to remember. But
Yeah.
but what let but what garnered you interest not just in hurricanes but chasing storms?
I think just like every other storm chaser my age and maybe a little older, Bill Paxton and the movie Twister. That is what that's what got me into it. Twister was the first movie that I remember watching and actually being able to understand, and my grandma played it for me all the time. And so it was one of those movies that I loved, and I can still quote it word for word today. But that was the movie that got me into weather. And then of course, living in Florida, in the Panhandle, you get hurricanes that happen all the time, and then during the winter, you get the squall lines that come through that have nasty weather contained in it, and it's just something that I've loved ever since.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I met Brian. Of course, I remember seeing Brian Norcross cover Hurricane Andrew. I actually met Brian doing for a book sign for the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew. I was interested, and then he went and covered Hurricane Harvey when it impacted Texas the
Yeah,
same week. T- t- But Florida seemingly gets storms. I mean, there are all 3 or 4 areas that get storms: North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Louisiana. For some reason, storms have skipped around Savannah. Though Savannah was hit by Helene last year, not anything like what Florida or the folks in Asheville received, but
yeah.
you know, thinking back with hurricanes, there's one storm that garners my attention, the Panhandle, and I'm sure you remember it quite fondly. We'll talk about Hurricane Michael in a minute, but what was the first storm you actually chased?
The first hurricane I actually chased on my own was Hurricane Hermine in 2016.
And that was actually the first hurricane to hit Florida in over a decade.
Yeah, yeah. That's what broke the seal on on that drought for hurricane landfalls and in Florida. So yeah, so living in Panama City, I'm about 3 hours from Perry, and it's just a straight drive down Highway 98. So I got off work, hopped in the car, drove down 98, and drove along the coastal highway that goes down there through Wakulla County, Liberty County, all those rural areas, so to speak, and, or not sorry, not Liberty County, but Franklin County. I couldn't make it too far because the road eventually became impassable because of storm surge coming up and fallen trees and debris. But so I didn't make the center on that one, but I definitely went and chased it and got to feel a hurricane again for the first time in 11 years, and that was quite the experience.
Yeah, and I think Hermine. I don't know if you saw the video, but there was some storm surge in what's that one city that was hit by Helene? Cedar Key. Thank you.
Yeah, Cedar Key.
I don't know what it is, but Cedar Key always gets storm surge in hurricanes.
Yeah, and they're just it's the way that the continental shelf is, it's just so shallow for so far um, that you could have a hurricane, you know, 500 miles away off towards Louisiana and Texas. But that whole area in Appalachia Bay is so storm surge prone that they flood during thunderstorms. That's just how it is, and Cedar Key is definitely no exception. I mean, I don't know if you ever looked at it on a map, but they just kind of stick out there like a little island almost, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and there are a few areas. I mean, we're seeing what's happening with the Outer Banks and houses falling into the ocean. But
Yeah.
and then the next year, Irma, which true story, my mother and I almost evacuated. I was living in Broward County, and we almost evacuated thinking the storm was coming to the East Coast. Thank goodness we didn't. Otherwise, we would have ended up at my in-laws condo. But did you chase Irma?
I did. I did chase Irma. That one, I went. I drove pretty much the same area that I did for Hermine. I didn't go all the way down to Naples for that one. That was kind of a wait for it to come to me situation. But the way that Panama City was positioned, and really the area that I went, Appalachia Bay, the way it was positioned, we were under the influence of a north wind. So the wind's coming around the backside of the system. And instead of getting surge, we got what they call that reverse storm surge. So all the water was being shoved out of the bays and out towards the Gulf. And so there was a point where you could walk out for several miles where it used to be covered with water, but it was just dry, with no water covering it. So that was one of the things I saw. That was crazy.
Yeah, let me tell you this. Of course, we didn't see him because we lost power. But but a negative storm surge and actually have there were ships literally on the ocean floor. There was no water.
Right.
That's freaky.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, this was because Irma went more into Collier County instead of pulling, instead of going this way like Charlie and Ian did, or even worse, maybe going up the coast and hitting Tampa, which would have been uh,
Nightmare.
yeah.
Yeah, Irma was kind of weird in its track. Like you said, essentially just followed right up the spine of the state, and doing that, yeah, it did a lot of damage to places in Collier County,
And the
and Monroe County as well. But um, further inland and north places were spared. To like you said, to your point, there was a world that could have snaked its way back out into the Gulf and re-strengthened and then hit somewhere in the Panhandle, or could have curved back out into the Atlantic after hitting a place maybe like Tampa, or curving into Collier County like you discussed. So yeah,
or,
that was kind of a weird one.
or how about just sitting in Miami directly?
Yeah, and I am I'm very curious to see how that would be handled today. Um, One, because of what my real job is and what I do on the outside, and two, just from a hurricane chaser perspective, um, I would like to see how the locals in Miami handle something like that. So the big thing that we have, and I'm sure you see this all the time living in Southwest Florida, there's a lot of transplants, people that move from other states that like to come down here.
Snowbirds?
Yep, snowbirds who want to make this their permanent nest, and they've never been through a hurricane before. And so or maybe they went through a small tropical storm or something. And so they think, okay, well, this will be just fine. But then you get, God forbid, something like Andrew or Ian or something hitting Miami. All those people that have never been through this before, there's no telling what that's going to create. That's a logistical nightmare.
And I mean maybe not south of Miami, but the city of Miami has been impacted by a major hurricane in forever. Ever, of
Right.
course, 1826 hurricane, and then 30s, 40s, 50s, and of course Bessie hit there in the 60s. But still, it's been decades, and there aren't that many people and who've been through major hurricanes in Miami. Plus, the infrastructure, maybe not building code wise, but they're all thousands of buildings in and around the water, whether it be whether it be the ocean, the river, the harbor, what is it? That other waterway on the East Coast, the
The Intracoastal Waterway?
Intercoastal Waterway. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Hmm.
And there aren't that many roads north out of Miami. I mean, 95, A1A, US 1, maybe 75, but then you get on the turnpike, and guess what? If 5 million people evacuate, it's going to take
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the turnpike, once you get outside Fort Lauderdale, the turnpike's just 4 lanes. It's 2 lanes each direction, and it's not the most well built highway. Now they've done a lot of work on it, obviously trying to improve it. And but the weird thing about Florida is, and I looked this up during Milton, and I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, Florida doesn't do contraflow. So they don't open up both lanes of traffic to flow one way. They just open up the shoulder, and then they basically make the shoulder another travel lane. So, places like Louisiana where they do contraflow for I-10, if everybody's evacuating eastbound, they'll make the westbound lanes travel east and they'll close westbound traffic. Florida doesn't do that. So that also adds another problem because you're only given 1 lane as opposed to 3 or 4. And so people just get stuck. And I think we even saw that with Milton, people trying to leave Tampa stuck in crazy traffic jams, you know?
Yeah, and by the way, what would be your number one city that would be most susceptible, maybe not to having a hurricane, a major hurricane, but what would be I mean, not like LA or Chicago because hurricanes aren't going to hit Chicago, maybe probably not LA, but what would be the number one city you think that would be most susceptible to having a devastating hurricane strike?
So, for a devastating hurricane strike to be most susceptible, honestly, I would I would argue Jacksonville.
Oof.
I would argue Jacksonville because of the way they're positioned along the coast and the fact that they haven't had a direct hit from a storm in a long time. Now, obviously, Matthew in 26 skirted up the coast and gave them a good brushing as it was moving on, but a direct strike on Jacksonville coming east to west across the Atlantic as opposed to going up north, I think that would be the most devastating. And we could talk about this a little more with Hurricane Michael when we get there. But uh, Florida, obviously, as you know, we have strict building codes, and that's thanks to Hurricane Andrew with the high velocity wind zones and everything that were created. But a lot of these places, if they were never built up to code in the first place, they were never upgraded to code. So Jacksonville is one of those places where there's a lot and a lot of buildings that are old school that are not quite built up to code, that if they get hit by a major hurricane, then you're going to see a lot of damage. And that's exactly what happened here in Panama City with Hurricane Michael. A lot of our buildings around here were not built up to code, despite the fact they had to be, but nothing's ever happened to cause them to be rebuilt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and plus, the last hurricane to really strike Jacksonville directly was Dora in 1964.
Yep.
We mentioned Miami. You know what city hasn't been hit by a major hurricane longer since Miami? Tampa.
Yeah, about to say, yeah, Tampa. That was going to be my next guess. Yeah.
And Tampa's got a lot of infrastructure that's full. I mean, we saw with Helene and Milton what could happen. I mean, Tropicana Field looked like it went through an artillery shell.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And so that would be my second answer behind Jacksonville would be Tampa. The reason I didn't. I was reluctant to say Tampa is taking into account the human aspect of it. So for the last couple of years, Tampa has had their fair share of close calls with Milton and Ian and some of these other storms that may have come through, like Elsa, for example, in 21. Um, so a lot of these folks, I think, at least from my conversations with them, they take these things more serious, and you're starting to see a lot of new construction in Tampa, and it's actually well built construction. Now you're going to have the same problem everywhere. Tampa, Jacksonville, doesn't matter, of the older homes, but there's more people that are moving into Tampa are finding newer places as opposed to older places that are not built as well. So um, I didn't want to pick Tampa because of that, but I think you're exactly right. I think that's definitely number two on the list.
And now we get to the big ones. One, there are only four Category 5 hurricanes that have hit the U.S. 1935 Labor Day hurricane, Camille in 69, Andrew in 92, and Michael in 2018. And one of us was in Hurricane Michael, and it wasn't me. It was you. You were in Hurricane Michael in Panama City. So, where exactly were you for Panama City, and were you thinking this is going to be the big one?
Yeah. So where I rode the storm out, I rode it out in my childhood home with my mom. My grandma went to the local church, the big, well built church, to ride it out with my uncle, her son, and a couple other people that didn't want to evacuate but didn't feel quite safe in their home. And so my mom and I rode it out in my grandma's house, just trying to keep an eye on everything, mitigate any damages that may have popped up. But what really set in that, okay, this is the big one, was probably early in the morning on October 10th, whenever, still about 6 hours from landfall, when hurricane hunters were flying in it. And each report and each pass through the center showed a millibar drop and a wind speed increase. And it was constant. It was like almost every report, winds were going up by 5, 5, 5, 5. And I tried to find the video because the anniversary had just passed. But I did a live video on my Facebook page, and it's about 2 minutes long. And this is back when I smoked cigarettes. I stopped now, obviously, but I was stressed out. I had a cigarette in my hand, and I recorded a video talking to all my friends and family on Facebook, saying, "Guys, I think this is it. Our time of dodging bullets has come and passed, and you guys need to be ready. It's too late to leave. Get to a center part of your house and stay there until tomorrow, basically." And I left my apartment, drove across town, picked up my grandmother, and then took her to the church. But before I dropped her off, we did one loop around the block. And I said, "Take a good look, because here in about 6 hours, it's not going to look like this anymore." And part of me didn't believe it. Part of me thought that, maybe it's not going to be that bad. Maybe we'll get lucky. But then, sure enough, 6 hours later, total destruction, total devastation. Didn't recognize anything.
Did you? I mean, did you even consider leaving, or were you like, or were you basically obligated to stay for your family?
Combination of both. So I established at a young age that whenever I do get my own home and I'm responsible for my own life, I'm not evacuating. I'm not leaving. I'm gonna ride out. I'm gonna ride out anything. One, I'm a storm chaser, so I put myself in these positions all across the country anyway. So I'm sure as heck not gonna leave the comfort of my own home, right? And then number two, what I did for my employment, I was obligated to stay. I worked for the Bay County Sheriff's Office, so when I started working there, I basically had to sign a contract that says,
I'm
I'm a,
not.
yep, I'm a first responder. I'm not evacuating. I have to stay. And so that wasn't a major determining factor, but there was also that caveat that I am obligated to stay. But
So,
no.
so wait, you were a cop?
So I was a correctional officer.
Oh,
Yeah, so I worked for the Bay County Jail when Hurricane Michael hit, and I also worked for the Florida Department of Corrections, the state prison, um, a couple years before that, and for a couple of years after that. But I worked for the Bay County Jail for a little bit in between,
I'm
and
guess I'm guessing the Bay County Jail evacuated.
nope, we were there. The jail was there. Um, the jail was there for the entire time, and I remember I went so the hurricane hit Wednesday, and my scheduled days off were Wednesday, Thursday, and it was weird how we did the schedule. One week you would work Monday, Tuesday, you would be off on Wednesday and Thursday, and then you would work Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then the next week it flipped. But that particular week, I was scheduled to work that weekend, but I had Wednesday, Thursday off. So I worked the overnight shift. Tuesday morning, I got off work at 6 a.m. And then I went home. That's when I did everything I just talked about on the forecast, making the video or on the podcast, making the video, things like that. But I didn't go back into work until Friday. Well, we had no cell phone service, nothing. So Verizon was down. I think AT&T was down. I think only Sprint and T-Mobile were the only two towers that were up and running at the time. So Verizon and AT&T were just down. But I went into work on Friday and I showed up and my lieutenant was there and he never left. So he had been at the jail since the hurricane hit up until I got there on Friday. And he basically came up and gave me a big hug and said, "Thank you so much for showing up. You can go whatever dorm you want to go. Just please help these people out." There had all been officers that had been working for 36 hours straight without a break. Um, but then the inmate side of it, the inmates had absolutely no idea how bad it was outside. And so they thought that we were deliberately withholding showers, we were deliberately withholding air condition, deliberately withholding television. They had no idea. And so they rioted, or they tried to riot. And they actually attacked a couple of the officers on my shift. And so me and my other officer who was in the dorm with me, we ran to the call and we got in there. And man, like I said, it was nothing short of a riot. They were trying to break down the door, trying to get out, because again, they thought that we were purposely putting them in this situation. And eventually, the lieutenant had to get in there and be like, "Look, I can't show you guys how bad it is out there, but I need you to take my word for it. It is an apocalyptic wasteland out there," and it
was
was.
was there any damage to the jail done by said hurricane?
Yeah, a couple of the AC units were blown off the roof. Those big 2-ton, 4-ton units that are up there, just
Yeah,
completely blown off the roof in the from the storm.
interesting that interesting because you hear in storms now that the jails always evacuate, but that didn't happen in Bay County. Hmm.
And a lot of it had to do with leadership. I think there's two causes for that. Excuse me. There's the first cause, which is we've always been lucky. We've always dodged a bullet.
Rather be good
And
than lucky, right?
yeah, we've always dodged a bullet. So there's no need for us to evacuate because it's just going to end up missing us. That was part of it. And then the other part of it was by the time they realized how serious it was too late. And so they had no choice but to stay because it was too late. And that was the same thing with the state prisons as well. Gulf Correctional Institution is located in Weehawken, Florida, which is in Gulf County. And the prison itself actually went right through the center of Hurricane Michael. And all of those inmates did not get evacuated. So they all rode it out in this prison. Now, of course, prisons are made out of solid concrete and rebar. So there was no danger of collapse. but the roofing systems and the amenities, those were all destroyed. And so they ended up, after the hurricane, having to move all those inmates out and ship them to different places across the state because the compound was closed. It was too damaged. But, you know, uh, prisoners, for the most part, inmates, they're there for a reason. And, obviously, if they're there, it's probably because they deserve to be there. But the human empathy of it still doesn't go away. You know, try to put myself in their shoes. How would I react if I was essentially held against my will in this place, behind rebar, with no contact with the outside world, and it sounds like the apocalypse is happening right outside my window?
Sounds like a tornado happened. So
Yeah.
obviously the crooks didn't know a Cat 5 hurricane was hitting there.
Right. Yeah. No, they had no idea. And again, because Tuesday morning, whenever Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning before landfall, we were talking Cat 4. That's when, we were thinking, okay, Category 4, but a lot of people were still holding out hope that maybe at the last second it was going to shift off to the left or shift off to the right, and it never did, and it just kept growing. And now, like, I remember right after Hurricane Michael, it took a couple of weeks because it was real pretty weather after the hurricane hit. But a couple of weeks later, we started to get into fall, where you get these cold fronts that come through and the severe weather associated with it. Um, People were just having a complete meltdown, like a total nervous breakdown on Facebook and social media because of this line of severe storms. One, because they just went through a traumatic hurricane, and two, a lot of their shelters and a lot of their places that they stay in were damaged and destroyed, and they didn't have anywhere to go. So the mental aspect of it is something that is still around today. And I tell you, I've been through 24 tropical cyclones that I've chased, and that's not including the ones from 2004, 2005 when I was a kid. Those are just ones I've chased. And Michael was the only one that has legitimately given me a PTSD type flashback. You know, so it was a different breed. It was a different breed, and people ask me, "Oh, you went through Michael, so that must have been bad. Are you still going to chase them?" Absolutely. I'm going to chase hurricanes until the day I'm not able to.
Back to before the storm hit. So like 9, 10 o'clock, you're at your house. You're in your safe place. What were you and your mother thinking? Thinking before a Category 5 hurricane was going to hit your area.
My mother was more excited than I was.
Wow.
Yeah, so she had a big hand, and also in my influence of weather, because she liked it. She always loved going through thunderstorms and stuff like that. But she was always like, "Let's go outside. Let's take a look. Let's open the door. Let's see what's going on." And so, about 9 or 10 o'clock, we're finally starting to get into the main rain shield. We're starting to get into the thicker stuff. We're not quite in the core yet, but we're still, we're starting to see those winds pick up. And about every 5 minutes, she was opening up the door, going outside, taking a look. And then I think it was when the first pine tree fell down across the street from us that she realized, oh, this is real. But the whole time I knew, because this is what I do. And eventually I had to pull her in. I'm like, Mom, you need to get inside the house because it's about to get nasty. And about 10 minutes later, um, we had the extreme wind warning that was issued by the National Weather Service in Tallahassee. I think it was their first time ever issuing one. And then immediately after it was issued, the power went out and the internet went out. And we didn't get power back for 3 months, and we didn't get internet back. Sorry, we got power back in a month and internet in three. But that was the last time we had working internet at that place, for a long time. But everything went off, and then all of a sudden, the core was getting closer and closer, and that's when we knew. And that was about 10:30, 11 o'clock.
Tell me about the house you lived. Were there any shutters? I mean, like, how new the house was? Was it a concrete house or wood frame house?
Yeah, so it was masonry, brick, a brick house, um, built in the early '80s. My grandparents were the second owners on paper, but they were the first family that lived there, and they had lived there since '84. And so they moved into the house in 1984, and it was built, out of brick basically. Um, but the roof had never been replaced to that point. The roof was really old. A lot of things in that home were old. There was just no work that was done to it. But my grandfather, it was one of those people that, if there's nothing that needs to be done, I'm not going to do it. If unless water's pouring on my head from the ceiling, I'm not going to worry about it. So everything that went through Michael was original from '84.
Were there any? Did you guys have any shutters?
No, nothing, nothing. We were just wide open to the 160-mile-an-hour winds.
Was it away from the water? Was it like in an evacuation zone?
We lived on the precipice of the evacuation zone, so we were right there on the border, but we were out of it. But there's a little creek and a canal, that runs behind our house. But it's not like the canals down in Southwest Florida where they're, big and, you can swim across them. It's just a little drainage creek type of deal. But when it rains a lot and there's a lot of activity from water, it can flood. And then when it floods, it creeps up into our backyard. And my biggest fear was always, if a category 5 hit at the right angle, it would push the water from the bay into Martin Lake. Then the water from Martin Lake would then be pushed upstream into the creek, and all of that water from the creek would then find its way into our yard and eventually our house. And so what was scary was we were away from the ocean, away from the Gulf, but we had that creek. And during the height of the storm, obviously I had no power, no internet, so I didn't have any radar. I couldn't see where the storm was and what angle it was coming in. But the winds outside, they're gusting to 160, 170, and trees are falling down left and right. You can't see. It's like a blizzard almost. And my thought the entire time was, oh my God, that creek is flooding and it's eventually going to get into the house. And I was worried because, well, if the water gets into the house, where are we going to go? We can't go anywhere. We can't go outside. Can't go up because we have the attic, but it's not that big. But yeah, so to answer your question directly, we were on water per se, but not like the Gulf or a bay. There was a little drainage ditch that fed into Martin Lake.
So it wasn't like what happened in Lake Pontchartrain during Katrina when the flood, but it was water, but not Gulf water. It wasn't, bay water.
Right, right. Yeah, it was all freshwater flooding, and it flooded back there, but it didn't make it up to the house because the way that the house is built, it's built on an incline. So at the top of the incline here is the house, and then down at the bottom is the creek. So the creek rose up to about here, but it didn't quite make it to the house. So that was good.
But so now tell me when the eye wall came. One, what did it sound like? And two, what could you see, or maybe not want to see?
Yeah. So when the eye wall of Hurricane Michael came through, it was about noonish is when it happened. Um, we peeked out. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. In the eye wall, my mom and I, we put a mattress in the hallway, and then we basically laid on the floor like this with our heads together and our feet facing out like that. Yep, and we had the mattress down on top of us because we're surrounded by pine trees in that neighborhood. And so my thought was, if a pine tree falls through this house, because we're not going to see it, but if a pine tree falls through the house, at least we're under a mattress and we have some sort of protection. We have some kind of chance. But the way that the wind whistled through a brick building is something that will always stick with me. And then about, I don't know, a couple minutes later, we heard a loud crash coming from the garage. And we went, and so the way that it worked, we had a door leading to the garage. And then obviously in the garage was the garage door that opened up to the outside. Well, we opened up the garage door from our house to the garage. And when I did, I almost got sucked out into the garage. I didn't know what had happened, but then I looked and our garage door had blew in. And so all of that wind, those 160-mile-an-hour wind gusts were being blown in and compressed through this little crack, or now really a hole at this point, from where the garage door was and the frame of the house. And so it was coming in like a wind tunnel, basically, and winds inside the garage were almost as strong as outside because of the way the winds were being funneled in. And my mom had, and I'm a big guy, right? My mom had to pull me as I was pulling the garage door closed because that's how much resistance there was on it from the wind. And then that's when it really sank in for her that things were going south. And then as we got closer to the center and closer to the center, you could feel your ears pop as those wind gusts were coming through, and each strong wind gust brought in a new ear pop or a new sound or a new feeling. And yeah, that was something that if I'm going to go through a hurricane again, I want to be out. I want to be out in my car because I want to see what's going on, and I want to try to position myself. But I lived in that house my whole life. It was my childhood home, basically, and it was always a place of safe refuge. But to feel it shake in those 160, 170-mile-an-hour wind gusts is something I'll never forget.
Was there a feeling that you and your mom might not live through, Michael?
I probably had that feeling for about 5 minutes. It was probably right after the garage door blew in, and right before the eye wall, or right before the eye passed over. We were in the eye for about 10 minutes. We didn't get a direct center, but we got clipped by the northwest corner of the eye, so we had the clearing and all that for about 10 minutes. But during the time between the garage door blowing in and the eye passing, I thought to myself, okay, there's a legitimate chance that a pine tree could fall through this house and land on us and kill us. I wasn't worried about the roof blowing off. I wasn't worried about the walls collapsing. And really, by that point, I wasn't even really worried about the canal anymore and the water coming up. I was just worried about a big pine tree falling through the house. And thankfully, that never happened. But during that brief period, yeah, I absolutely thought that.
Did you even consider going outside doing the eye, or were you just basically in your spot the whole time?
During the eye, we took a moment to go. So we have a back porch, basically a sunroom, a Florida room. We went out onto the Florida room, and it's screened in, but we went out there. We were gonna go out back and take a look, but there was just trees that had fallen down on the deck and by the sunroom, and so the door was blocked, and so there was no way for us to open up the porch door to go outside. We tried, but we couldn't. Um, then we opened up the front door, and there were a bunch of wires hanging out in front of our front door. We didn't know if they were live or not, and so we were just like, yeah, let's just avoid that. And so we ended up staying inside, but we took that moment to kind of survey the damage to see where we were. All of the seals on the window had broken. Water was flooding into every room through the windows, from being blown in through those storm created openings. And There was a lot of flooding on the carpet. It wasn't deep, but it was definitely enough to cause damage and problems. Um, but yeah, we tried to go outside, couldn't, and then just took kind of that moment to take a breather. And of course, me knowing weather, I knew the back half was coming, and so I told my mom, I was like, "All right, let's take a break. The second that this wind kicks back up, let's go back to the hall for the backside." And thankfully, the backside was nowhere near as bad.
So, did you ever go back outside when the eyewall was done ravaging Panama City? When did you finally go outside, and what were the scenes like?
So we went outside right after everything had started to calm down. This was about 4 p.m. And the neighbor across the street, you can hear in her voice that she had been crying. I think they had just moved from like New York or some northern state, and they had never been through this before. And so you could hear in her voice she had been crying and terrified. And she yelled out from her front door, "Is it over?" And and I was like, "Yeah, I think so." Um, we went through the eye earlier, and things are calming down. I think we're good. And so she came out. All the neighbors, everybody started to come out of their homes, and the only way to describe it was like somebody dropped a nuke on the town, and then it didn't destroy the buildings in our area, but what was once a kind of a thick forest almost built on top of a swamp was just completely devoid of trees and foliage and things of that nature. It was just all gone. The houses were thankfully fine, but um, and for the most part, one of my friends' neighbor on that street, a tree fell right through the center of their home, which they were okay, thankfully, physically. But that was what my concern was for our home. But tree fell through their house, but they were okay. They'd actually left to go somewhere else. Um, and then after that, we just started talking to neighbors. We walked around the street for a little bit to look at everything. Um, by that point, the sun was starting to go down a little bit, and so we went back to the house and locked the door and settled in for the first night. But it looked like during the daylight, like I said, like a bomb had been dropped.
So, other than in the garage, the structure of the house was intact.
Structure of the house was intact. We had a lot of roof damage. The roof needed to be replaced. Those windows needed to be replaced because of the seals that were damaged. But the walls themselves, the framing, all that stuff was fine.
Wait, do you mean the roof itself was damaged, or just the shingle part of the roof?
The shingle part of the roof was damaged. I don't think there was any damage to the sheathing underneath the shingles. I don't think there was any damage, but I know that a bunch of shingles were blown off and ripped off.
But for being in an eye wall of 160-mile-an-hour hurricane, I mean, with the damage I'm sure you saw,
Yeah,
I'm guessing you and your mom will consider yourselves lucky.
yeah, we were lucky for sure. And a lot of the houses in our neighborhood kind of had the same fate, where it was ton of shingle damage, ton of damage to like the exterior facades, but there was no structural damage for the most part because a lot of the homes in that neighborhood were made of brick. And so because of the way it was constructed with brick, they held up fine, and even in the strongest of wind gusts. Um, which in the eye wall, we had those mesovortices where, in some instances, wind instantaneous wind gusts were over 200 mile an hour in certain parts of the eye wall, and we it survived and it did okay, outside of course, the shingle damage and things like that. But then as you branched out and got further out, and started getting a better view of more buildings in town, you started to see that a lot of people weren't as lucky as really our neighborhood.
Yeah, particularly around the Air Force Base and Mexico Beach. I mean, Mexico Beach, I remember seeing videos of whole structures being swept into the Gulf. I mean, remind me of Michael seeing a whole structure being swept into the Gulf.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I haven't read the report in a while, but I think the maximum storm surge recorded was 14 foot in Mexico Beach. It could be 18, but I think it was 14. But that for the type of construction that was there at the time, you
Yeah.
know, it was not surviving that, and so a lot of stuff got wiped out.
I'm sure you saw the one building that was built for the big one, or heard about the one building that was built for the big one.
You're talking about the El Governor, the motel?
No, the house on Mexico Beach that was built for the big one.
Oh yeah, the circle one, right? Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I can't remember how that one did. I think it did okay, all
No,
things considered.
I think there was like a concrete with like 40-foot house with 40-foot pilings that withstood the winds, but
Yeah.
I don't think it fared quite as well as the apartment did. What was the apartment like?
Oh, the apartment was totaled. The apartment was absolutely destroyed. And so we were living with my mom-in-law at the time. It was me, my wife, and my mom-in-law, her mom. And we were getting ready to move out of the apartment anyway. We were actually scheduled to move into the new home the day Hurricane Michael hit. Um, and the house that we moved into was actually closer to the center of the storm, but it did a lot better because it was an old school brick house. They had actually just replaced the roof, and a lot of the construction components were new because they did a lot of renovations to it, and it held up just fine. But the apartment, um, we were on the first floor, the ceilings were caving in, everything was soaked, a lot of our stuff was damaged. Um,
I'm guessing the windows were not built for 160 mile per hour winds.
no, no, they were not. So there was just a ton of water damage that came in, and a lot of things that were that were damaged there, and um, the apartment didn't do too well. It's better now. Obviously, it's been 7 years, so they came back and bounced back. But at the time, you know, it had only it had been about 2 days had passed from the time the hurricane hit to the time I went back to the apartment. And just in 2 days alone, you could already start to smell the mildew, and you can already start to smell the scent of growing mold, just in the 2 days that had passed.
Yeah, that would have been a fun. By the way, we know the building codes throughout certain areas, whether it be Miami-Dade or Broward or Bay County or Lee County where I am changes. What is Bay County's building code? Because I heard it's for what, 120 mile an hour winds. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're in zone 3, I think. So we go off the high velocity wind zone, which was created for, right after Hurricane Andrew, and I think it's 125 is what we were built for. And then after that, I think they changed it, and now I want to say it's 140,
Not bad.
but I could be wrong on that. I don't know for sure.
And the problem is, all the buildings are typically exempt from a lot of these wind mitigations.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about with Jacksonville being my pick for the most susceptible area, because you talk about those exemptions and you talk about those wind zones that they're in, and in a changing climate, whatever you want to blame it on, that's a different conversation. But in a changing climate, these places are more at risk. And if they haven't been properly prepared, or they're not prepared, then you never know what's going to happen. And that was the case of what happened in Panama City. But you know, 7 years later, we're bouncing back. But There's still a lot of places around that are destroyed, and a lot of the area is still deforested.
Yeah, looking at the pictures you sent me, Tyler, it's freaky how times have changed. Feels like yesterday that the hurricane hit.
Yeah, it does. Um, like I said, Michael was the only storm that had ever given me flashbacks, or like I guess PTSD is really the only way to say it. That was the only storm that's done that. And every now and then, it's probably happened 2 or 3 times since the hurricane hit. But when the wind really starts to get whipping and blowing, for a brief moment, I'm back in the hallway at the house. Like I've been transported through time. It's the craziest feeling. Craziest, like I can't even describe it. It's insane.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and since then, and since Michael, what's the craziest hurricane you've chased?
Since Michael, I would have to say it's a tie. It's a tie between Beryl in 2024, and it's Beryl and Milton, both in 2024. Both were probably the craziest storm that I experienced and that I chased. So the thing about Beryl was it was a strengthening storm upon landfall, and it almost hit Category 2 threshold. Um, where I chose to ride it out, we ended up getting trapped on the bridge. Um, Mike's weather page was there, Reed Timmer, a couple of other famous storm chasers. We all chose this place to ride it out in Sargent, Texas, and we were all basically stranded by this counter surge essentially from the bay running across the road. And then of course the winds itself, the winds for for a category 1, they were absolutely whipping. And that howl was something that I hadn't heard in a long time. And so that was Beryl, category 1. Category 3, Milton at landfall. I blew out my tire in the first half of the storm. And my buddy and I, we tried to replace the tire in the eye. We were in the actual eye where things were calm for about 20 or 30 minutes. But I have an old Chevy Yukon or GMC Yukon, and the way that the spare tire is, you have to take this long metal pole and then wheel down the spare tire. Well, it was stuck and we couldn't get it down. And so by the time we did, the winds on the backside had started to kick up when that Sting jet was coming through. And so we had to drop the car off the jack, or the SUV off the jack. We still had the jacked up tire, and we were stuck. We couldn't go anywhere. And we were perpendicular to the winds. So the winds were slamming into the side of us, and not the position I wanted to be in. And I told my buddy in the passenger seat, hey, man, you may want to go ahead and put your seat back in case something blows out the window, because the winds and everything were hitting his side. And we were easily gusting over 110, 120. We were right next to the Sarasota airport, literally a quarter mile from the airport, on a side road. And I was worried about storm surge coming up, but thankfully it didn't. But the winds from that and the howl from that was otherworldly.
Yeah, it turns out, yeah, last year's 2024 hurricane adventures went very well for you.
Yeah.
And of course, Reed Timmer, one of the goats in storm chasing. I think he chased. I don't know how. I've lost count on how many tornadoes and hurricanes he chased. Mentioned Mike's weather and page just up the road from me. Me, of course, Jim Adams, Josh Morgan, who I think chased a cyclone in the Philippines this week, if my memory serves me right.
Yeah, he did. Yep. He got back home from Jamaica. He stayed home for like 2 days, and then he was on a flight to the Philippines. So that's the mantra.
Why chase storms? Why chase hurricanes? Is it a situation where all the wind data might be destroyed, and these guys and you guys want to collect data, or do you have that adrenaline junkie feel of I have to chase the storm?
For me specifically, it's a combination of the two. Definitely an adrenaline rush. There's no place I'd rather be than the eye wall of a major hurricane. It's uh, it's one of the most indescribable things as somebody who's never been through it before. But then the other half of that, of course, is data collection. So I have two Kestrel 5500s that I use for sampling surface pressure. I don't I don't take wind measurements with it, even though I could, but I do. I just do pressure readings, and so I mark my location where I'm at, latitude, longitude, and then as I'm doing that, I'm taking measurements of the pressure, and then I'm reporting it to the local National Weather Service and sending that to them. And if they want to use it, great. If not, no problem. They still have it anyway, right? And so just it's part of ground truth, verifying what we're seeing on the ground, and then of course a lot of it is that adrenaline rush that I want to be in this.
What was your lowest pressure in Michael?
So I didn't have the Kestrel at the time for Michael, but I cyclone Josh Morgerman. He was 2 miles from my house. I think he recorded 922, and I can't I can't remember the pressure gradient, but he was 2 miles from where we were. It was something sharp. I think we got really really low 930s or maybe upper 920s is where we got at the house.
So maybe you could say you escaped the very worst conditions of a Category 5.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it kind of feels disingenuous to say I went through a Category 5 hurricane because we didn't get the true Category 5 conditions, 157 sustained, right? We got those in gust. We were probably sustained 120, 130, but we were easily over 160 in the form of gusting. Now, further to the east, and even a little bit past Josh Morgerman, that's where you started to see those Category 5 conditions. Mexico Beach specifically, they got hit with a Category 5.
Tin, would you say Tyndall got hit with a Cat 5?
I would say Tyndall did, yeah, because that's where it made landfall. I'm not sure how too familiar you are with the area, but there's a stretch between Tyndall Air Force Base and Mexico Beach. It's all owned by the Air Force. I don't know if it's part of Tyndall Air Force Base specifically, but it's all owned by the government. But that stretch is where the hurricane made landfall, and I'd say probably 5, maybe 10 miles on either side of that experienced the true core of a Category 5 hurricane. And that happened to be Mexico Beach to the right, and then the actual Air Force Base to the left. The actual Air Force Base definitely got hit by Category 5 conditions, at least I think. Um, the anemometer at the drone runway was,
Yeah.
yeah, 139 was the peak gust, and then it blew off like 2 hours before landfall or something like that. It was crazy. So it never even measured the true strength.
Yeah, and the crazy thing, I remember the day before Michael, they questioned whether or not Panama City Beach would be there.
And I was one of those people too because based on everything that we were seeing, we were kind of thinking West Bay County or extreme eastern Walton County, which would have put Panama City Beach on the right hand side. And so the right hand side of a landfalling major hurricane, as we know, that's not the place you want to be. That's where we thought Panama City Beach and Panama City were going to end up. But obviously, it made landfall in eastern Bay County, putting everybody on the left hand side. So thankfully, the beach spared the worst of it. But yeah, no, the day before, a couple days before, I was even one of those people. I told people if they lived on the beach, they need to get out of town, because the storm surge is going to be nasty and unsurvivable. And it verified, but not in Panama City Beach. It verified in Mexico Beach, you know, and that's just a shift of a few miles.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know if you were watching TV or had a radio, but what was the local ABC affiliate was talking about how like the halfway bridge was going to be closed at like 9 or 10 o'clock.
Yeah, WMBB. That's the local ABC affiliate. And so the thing about Florida is, at least in Bay County, there's no set wind speed. They just stick two state troopers at the foot of the bridge, and then those state troopers make the decision on whether or not they're going to close it. And so once the winds reach a certain point, according to the state trooper, that's when they decide to close it. But I think in this case, um, I think they just picked 55 mile, or they picked a certain time, because the standard is for a big bridge like the Hathaway 55 mile an hour, 55 sustained. We're closing the bridge, but in this case, I think they just picked the time because they knew what was going to happen, and they said everybody needs to be home before then. And if you're stuck on one side of the bridge or the other, too bad, you're stuck.
Yeah, and I remember hearing and you probably have heard it in the Michael videos of calls saying, "My house is falling, or there's water in my house," and I'm like, that's why there's an evacuation, whether it be from storm surge, from flooding, from wind, or some combination of all three. You can get out. Haven't you heard of shelters?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And a lot of people learn lessons the hard way, but um, I know a lot of people are leaving, and in fact, a lot of people evacuated from Helene. Now, Helene at the last moment kind of made just a slight jog into Perry. It was looking like there was a world where it could clip Franklin County, Apalachicola, and had it clipped Apalachicola,
Tallahassee.
things in yeah, Tallahassee would have been bad. Panama City wouldn't have been terrible, but it still would have been hit with something. But since it ended up on the other side of Appalachia Bay, everybody stayed. But the point of that is Michael changed a lot of people's minds. And now people are leaving at even the thought of a storm because they don't want to go through anything like that ever again.
Did you chase Helene last year?
I did, yeah. I rode that one out in Crawfordville.
Where's that?
So Crawfordville is just south of Tallahassee.
Okay.
So so you have St. George Island and all those places by Apalachicola. Then you go a little bit further up in the Bend, and then there's Crawfordville, and then there's Nothing, and then there's Perry. And so basically, I was on the left hand side of the storm.
So
I
you
was
So you were banking on the storm going to Tallahassee, and luckily it went more east.
Yeah, luckily for Tallahassee, it did end up going east. Because if you go back and you look, there's just kind of, it's subtle, but it's there. Just a little bend back to the east towards Perry. But had it not bended that way, I would have been right in the center, right in the eye. And by the time the bend started, it was too late for me to drive down to Perry. Um, and plus, local law enforcement were threatening storm chasers. They were threatening to arrest them. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. So I didn't want any part of that. I
Yeah,
I stayed out of that area.
and yeah, and you and I both know storm chasers. We want to be in the middle of things. I don't. You are a cop. You're like, I'm not going to end up in the county jail. That's not fun.
Nope, not me. Once this is over, I'm turning around and I'm going home. I'm not going to be stuck in some jail with no power.
And plus, as anyone who's spent time in Florida, the Forgotten Coast isn't exactly the Space Coast.
No, no. Yeah, the Forgotten Coast is stuck in time. It's like a peak back into the '60s.
A
It's
time capsule. a time capsule in a way.
It really is. Yep. Yes, sir.
I mean, it's like we go back 50 years. I mean, there are houses in Panama City, or condos in Panama City have been there longer than even one of us.
The Fountain Blue. The Fountain Blue is one of them. That's like one of the original ones that was built way back in the day. But I think it's so old. I think even Elvis owned a penthouse there. So yeah, crazy stuff.
Why would Elvis need a break away from the home in Memphis?
We can only speculate.
Why would Elvis? Why? Okay, never mind. Why would Elvis need a break from Graceland? But that's out of all fields. Of course. Never mind.
So
All right, Tyler. Thanks for hopping on the Big D podcast today. Wish you all the
absolutely.
best, and you know what? I'm thankful that we're done. Hopefully, knock on wood, done with hurricane season. But if there are any more future chases, we know you'll probably be in the middle of things.
Yeah, unless they're in another country until I get my passport. Once I get my passport, all bets are off. But yeah, I think we're good this year. 2026, I'll be looking for intercept number 25. That'll be a big milestone in my career. So we'll see what happens on that one. But no, I appreciate you having me on. It was a great time, and looking forward to talking with you soon.